My name is Harper. As a principal architect, my entire life has been built on precision, logic, and solid foundations. But 6 months ago, at 42 years old, I stood at a luxury altar in Napa Valley and willingly signed a marriage license with a man I knew was sleeping with my own mother. Most women would have screamed, cried, or canceled the wedding on the spot. I did none of that. I smiled, looked them both in the eye, and let the pen touch the paper, all to activate a hidden legal trap that would completely bankrupt them both before the reception even started. How did a single signature dismantle their entire lives without me shedding a single tear? I am about to show you the exact blueprint of my elegant revenge. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story of true justice. Now, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching this video from? And what exact time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below and let's get into the story. I have spent 15 years building a career as a principal architect in San Francisco. In my line of work, you learn to appreciate solid foundations and structural integrity. For a long time, I believed my personal life mirrored my professional success. I had a thriving firm, financial independence, and a flawless support system. At 42, I felt I had achieved the perfect balance. My fiancé, Chase, was 38, handsome, and possessed a charming demeanor that complemented my analytical nature. My mother, Victoria, was a poised, high society woman who never missed an opportunity to tell everyone how proud she was of my achievements. Together, the three of us formed a picture of American success. The wedding venue was a luxury boutique resort in Napa Valley, surrounded by rolling vineyards. Tonight was the rehearsal dinner, a private gathering of 50 close friends and family. The atmosphere was sophisticated. Chase stood beside me, his hand resting comfortably on my back. He raised his glass to the room, looking at me with deep devotion. "To Harper," he announced, his voice carrying across the pavilion. "The most brilliant woman I know, and tomorrow, my wife. I promise to spend every day making you happy." Victoria stood up right after him, her smile radiant. "Harper always demands excellence. Chase, you are the son I always wanted. Together, you will build an empire." The applause was warm. I smiled, raised my glass, and felt a profound sense of security. The foundation seemed unbreakable.
By midnight, the pavilion had cleared, and the guests had retired to their private cabins. I returned to my suite, but sleep refused to come. My mind was active, charting the logistics of the upcoming ceremony and the architectural projects awaiting my return to the city. Needing to clear my head, I stepped out into the cool Napa night. I walked down the gravel path, listening to the wind rustling through the grapevines, letting the quiet stillness settle my thoughts. Chase's villa was located on the northern edge of the property, separated by olive trees. As I walked past, a sliver of warm light cutting across the dark grass caught my eye. The heavy oak door of his villa stood open by a mere 2 inches. I paused, intending to slip inside to surprise him. But as I took a step closer, a sound drifted through the gap. It was a sharp, manicured laugh that I had heard my entire life. It belonged to my mother. My feet froze on the gravel. I approached the door silently, looking through the narrow opening. The interior was dimly lit, but the view was unmistakable. Chase and Victoria were on the sofa, their physical intimacy undeniable and deeply sickening. The betrayal was immediate, but before the shock could paralyze me, their voices cut through the quiet room. "You need to be careful tomorrow," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Don't let your eyes wander during the vows. Harper notices everything. We just need to get through the ceremony." Chase laughed, a cold, transactional sound. "Relax, Victoria. I've played the doting fiancé for 2 years. Once those papers are signed and the marriage is legally binding under California law, half of her assets are exposed.
Her firm, the real estate portfolio, it's all accessible. We've worked too hard setting up the offshore accounts to mess it up now. Victoria patted his cheek. Good. She thinks she's the smartest person in the room, but she has no idea she's been funding our future. I stood outside in the dark, my breath steady, my heart rate entirely under control. The illusion of my perfect life vanished, replaced by a cold reality. I did not cry. I did not storm inside. In my profession, when you discover a fatal structural flaw in a building, you don't scream at the walls. You systematically dismantle the structure before it can collapse on you. I quietly backed away from the door, reached into my pocket for my phone, and began walking back to my suite. The long game had just begun. By the time I reached the quiet sanctuary of my suite, my phone was already in my hand. It was 12:45 a.m. I didn't hesitate to dial Arthur Vance, my corporate and personal attorney for the last decade. He answered on the third ring, his voice alert despite the hour. Harper, is everything all right with the venue? I stood by the window, looking out at the darkened vineyards. The venue is fine, Arthur, I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. The groom is not. I just witnessed Chase and my mother planning to drain my estate post-marriage. They've been moving funds into offshore accounts. There was a brief, sharp silence on the line. As a top-tier California attorney, Arthur didn't waste time on sympathy. Do you want to cancel the ceremony? He asked cleanly. No, I replied, my mind calculating the architectural precision of my counterstrike. If I object before the vows, the prenuptial agreement never becomes active. Chase walks away with whatever he has already stolen, and I am left with a public mess. I want him ruined. Arthur understood immediately. The prenuptial agreement we drafted has a strict ironclad infidelity clause, he explained. If either party commits adultery, they forfeit any claim to joint assets, spousal support, and must return any gifted capital. More importantly, if he used your name for fraud, we can trigger immediate asset freezes. But for this to work, the marriage certificate must be signed. The trap only springs once you are legally wed. Exactly, I said. We go through with the ceremony tomorrow. The moment the pen touches the paper, the trap closes. I need you to prepare the divorce petition, the asset freezing orders, and a civil suit for corporate embezzlement based on the offshore accounts he mentioned. Can you have the paperwork ready by tomorrow afternoon? Arthur's voice held a grim satisfaction. Consider it done. But Harper, you need undeniable proof of the infidelity before we file. Court-admissible evidence. I'll have it within the hour, I said, before hanging up. My next call was to Marcus Thorne, a licensed private investigator my architectural firm used for corporate background checks and vetting high-profile contractors. Marcus was based in San Francisco, but his network was extensive. I explained the situation in under 2 minutes. I need the security camera footage from the northern villa corridor at the Napa Resort, I told him. Specifically, the external angles covering Chase's entrance between midnight and now. I know the resort uses a high-end digital surveillance system. Marcus didn't hesitate. The head of security at that resort is an ex-cop I worked with in the department, he said. Give me 30 minutes. I'll get the raw, unedited cloud backup of that hallway. You'll have the digital file in your inbox. True to his word, 28 minutes later, my tablet chimed. I opened the email from Marcus. The attached video file was crystal clear. It showed Victoria entering Chase's villa at 11:45 p.m., followed by audio logs from the porch microphone that clearly captured their laughter and the detailed discussion of their financial plot. It was comprehensive, devastating, and entirely irrefutable in a California court of law. I forwarded file directly to Arthur with a brief note. Here is your ammunition. See you at the reception. I lay down on the bed, not out of exhaustion, but to rest my eyes. There were no tears, no feelings of heartbreak. Chase and Victoria viewed me as a financial target, a structure to be looted. They underestimated the fact that I was the architect. I knew exactly where the weight-bearing walls were, and tomorrow I was going to pull the pin. The afternoon sun hit the glass pavilion of the Napa Valley Resort perfectly. At 4 p.m., the music shifted, signaling my entrance. I walked down the aisle alone, wearing a simple, structured white gown. I didn't need my mother to walk me. I carried my own weight. Chase stood at the altar, looking immaculate in his bespoke tuxedo, a practiced, triumphant smile plastered across his face. In the front row, Victoria watched, wiping a fake tear from her cheek. They thought they were witnessing the coronation of their financial scheme. I knew they were walking straight into a legal vice. I reached the altar. Chase took my hand, his grip warm and steady. "You look beautiful, Harper," he whispered, a flawless performance of a man in love. I gave him a tight, controlled smile. "Let's get this done, Chase," I replied softly. The minister began the standard American liturgy, speaking of commitment, trust, and shared futures. I listened to the words, feeling a sharp sense of irony, but my focus remained entirely on the legal timeline. When the minister asked the pivotal question, I looked Chase dead in the eye. "I do," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the microphone system. Chase followed with his own vow, his tone ringing with false sincerity. Then came the signing of the marriage certificate. We stepped to the small wooden table at the side of the altar. Arthur Vance stood nearby as our official legal witness. I took the pen and signed my name with a steady hand. Chase took the pen next, his signature flourishing across the paper. The minister stamped the document. It was done. The marriage was legally binding under California law, and the prenuptial agreement, along with its devastating infidelity clause, was officially active. Chase turned to me, leaning in for the traditional kiss. I stepped back, narrowly avoiding his lips, and reached out to take the wireless microphone from the minister's hand. The minister looked confused, but I calmly stepped to the center of the altar, facing the audience of 50 high-profile guests. "Thank you all for coming today," I began, my voice calm, projecting the absolute authority I used when presenting multi-million-dollar architectural blueprints. Before we proceed to the reception, Chase and I have a special presentation, a true look behind the scenes of how this union was built. On cue, Arthur signaled the tech booth at the back of the pavilion. The massive projection screen behind the altar rolled down. The guests leaned forward, expecting a romantic montage of our 2 years together. Instead, the screen flickered to life with the crisp, high-definition security footage Marcus had pulled the night before. The audio blasted through the pavilion's premium surround sound system. Victoria's manicured laugh filled the room, followed immediately by her distinct voice. "Harper notices everything. We just need to get through the ceremony." Then, Chase's cold, transactional response cut through the air. "Once those papers are signed and the marriage is legally binding, half of her assets are exposed. We've worked too hard setting up the offshore accounts." The reaction in the room was instantaneous. The absolute silence fractured into gasps of horror. Chase's face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. Victoria stood up, her jaw dropping as she stared at the screen displaying her own physical betrayal. The high society American crowd, colleagues, investors, and family friends who valued reputation and integrity above all else, turned their heads in collective disgust. Murmurs of outrage rippled through the rows. The pristine image Chase and Victoria had manufactured was obliterated in less than 60 seconds. I turned to Chase, the microphone still in my hand. "The foundation is rotten, Chase," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. The pavilion was a crucible of whispered outrages. Chase took a desperate step toward me, his hands raised in a frantic gesture of defense. "Harper, listen to me. This is a misunderstanding. The audio was manipulated," he stammered, his polished facade cracking completely. I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, looking at him with the same detachment I used when analyzing a flawed blueprint. "Do not speak, Chase," I said, my voice amplified by the microphone, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "The jurisdiction of your lies ends today. The cameras don't lie. My mother's voice doesn't lie. And more importantly, the law doesn't lie." I turned my gaze to the audience, addressing my colleagues, friends, and peers. "Thank you all for coming to Napa Valley. The ceremony is over and the reception is canceled. Please enjoy the resort amenities at my expense. But as of this moment, Chase Miller is no longer associated with me, my family, or my firm."
Arthur Van stepped onto the altar, his leather briefcase open. With precise, deliberate movements, he pulled out a thick stack of legal documents and pressed them against Chase's chest. "Chase Miller," Arthur said, his voice carrying the weight of a seasoned California attorney. "You are officially being served with a petition for the dissolution of marriage, effective immediately. Along with it, you are being served with a civil lawsuit for corporate fraud, grand larceny, and embezzlement."
Chase blinked rapidly, looking at the papers as if they were live explosives. "What is this? We just signed the license. We are legally married, Harper. You can't just throw papers at me." "Which is exactly why you are trapped," I said, stepping closer so only he and my mother could hear my voice clearly. If I had stopped the wedding before the vows, our prenuptial agreement would be worthless. But you wanted the marriage certificate signed. You wanted it legally binding. By signing that paper 5 minutes ago, you activated the infidelity clause we drafted. You have forfeited every single right to my estate, my company, and any spousal support. You leave this altar with exactly what you brought into it. Absolutely nothing." Chase's eyes widened as the reality of the legal trap settled in. You knew last night," he whispered, his voice trembling. Arthur menginterjected, tightening the news. "It gets worse for you, Mr. Miller. Based on the digital evidence of offshore asset diversion we presented to a judge early this morning, an emergency ex parte order has been executed. All of your personal and corporate bank accounts have been frozen effective at noon today. The capital you attempted to siphon from Harper's firm is locked. You cannot withdraw a single dollar, not even to retain a defense attorney." Chase dropped the documents, the white pages scattering across the steps of the altar. He looked around the room, desperately seeking a sympathetic face among the wealthy Silicon Valley investors he had spent years networking with. Every single one of them looked away. In the American business community, a corporate thief is toxic. He was socially contagious, and he was completely isolated. "You ruined me," Chase hissed, his jaw clenched, his eyes dark with sudden malice. "No," I corrected him calmly. "You ruined yourself the moment you mistook my silence for weakness. I am an architect, Chase. I know exactly how much weight a structure can bear before it collapses. You thought you were looting my future, but you were just digging your own grave. Enjoy the federal investigation." With Chase neutralized, I turned my attention to the front row. Victoria stood there, her Chanel suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. She stepped forward, trying to piece together her shattered social armor. "Harper, darling, let's go somewhere private and talk about this," she said, her voice trembling, but still trying to maintain that controlling maternal tone. "Family matters shouldn't be handled in public. You're emotional right now." I looked at her, completely unfazed. "I am not emotional, Victoria. I am transactional, just like you taught me to be." She blinked, shocked by the use of her first name. "I am your mother, Harper. You can't treat me like an adversary." "You stopped being my mother the moment you walked into my fiancé's villa last night," I replied, my voice carrying the chill of a San Francisco winter. "Let's talk about the practical realities of your new life. The Pacific Heights estate you live in is owned entirely by my architectural firm's holding company. Your name is not on the deed. My legal team has already drafted the eviction notice. You have 48 hours to pack your personal belongings and vacate the property." Victoria's face tightened, panic finally breaking through her cosmetic composure. "You can't do that. That is my home. Where am I supposed to go? What about my monthly allowance from the family trust?" "The trust is funded by my firm's revenue," I explained coldly. "As the sole trustee, I have restructured the distributions due to a breach of fiduciary duties and misappropriation of corporate resources. Your monthly allowance is terminated as of 5 minutes ago. Your corporate credit cards are already deactivated. If you attempt to access any business accounts, you will be facing the same grand larceny charges as Chase." She looked around the pavilion, her eyes wide with desperation. She sought out Mrs. DuPont, the prominent board member of the San Francisco Opera, and the Altons, who controlled the city's most exclusive charity galas. But as Victoria's eyes met theirs, they deliberately turned away, engrossed in their own quiet conversations. The social execution was instant. In our world, reputation is the ultimate currency, and Victoria had just declared bankruptcy. "Your high society friends won't help you, Victoria," I added, looking at the silent crowd. "They value status, and right now, you are a liability. By tomorrow morning, every charity board and country club in the Bay Area will have a copy of the legal filings. Your social standing is completely erased." She fell silent, her hands shaking, as she realized the absolute finality of my decisions. There was no room for negotiation, no space for manipulation. I had built a legal fortress around my assets, and she was locked on the outside. I looked down at the 5-carat diamond ring on my left hand. It was a beautiful piece of jewelry, but it was paid for with a line of credit that Chase had quietly opened using my firm's credentials. It was a symbol of deceit. I slipped the ring off my finger. I didn't throw it in anger or make a dramatic scene. I simply walked over to the serving table, dropped the diamond into a half-empty glass of champagne, and watched it sink to the bottom. I turned away from the altar, leaving Chase arguing with Arthur Vance and Victoria staring blankly at the floor. I walked down the aisle with my chin up and my spine straight. I walked out of the pavilion, past the luxury resort lobby, and directly to the valet station. My black sedan was waiting, its engine idling. I got into the driver's seat, adjusted the rearview mirror, and pulled out onto the main road, leaving the Napa Valley drama firmly in my dust. 6 months passed quickly. The dust from the Napa Valley fallout settled exactly as Arthur predicted, moving through the California court system with bureaucratic precision. While the media occasionally whispered about the high society scandal, I didn't waste a single day tracking the wreckage of my past. I left the criminal depositions and asset liquidations to my legal team. Instead, I redirected every ounce of my focus toward the future. I launched a complete, aggressive rebranding of my architectural firm. The old name, Miller and Harper Design, which had foolishly incorporated Chase's name to appease my mother's obsession with high society appearances, was completely erased from the building and the digital space. I renamed the company Harper Architecture Syndicate. The new branding was sharp, modern, and uncompromising, emphasizing structural integrity, absolute transparency, and unyielding precision. The American business community respects a calculated comeback, and the West Coast market noticed immediately. The market response significantly exceeded my quarterly projections. High-profile clients didn't distance themselves because of the public altar drama. If anything, the cold, efficient way I handled the betrayal proved my capability to manage crises under extreme pressure. Within 4 months of the rebranding, we secured the most lucrative contract in the history of the firm, a $90 million green tech corporate hub in the heart of Silicon Valley. During the final presentation to the tech conglomerate's board of directors, the chief executive officer reviewed my blueprints with an appreciative nod. "Harper," he said, looking at me across the boardroom table, "the aesthetic is phenomenal. That your risk management framework is what truly sets you apart. You don't leave a single variable to chance." I closed my tablet, meeting his eyes with absolute confidence. "When you spend years identifying structural flaws, you learn to build without vulnerabilities," I replied. "We construct for longevity, not for show." The contract was signed before the afternoon was over, cementing our dominant position in the industry. My personal life experienced a similar structural liberation. For the first time in my adult existence, the toxic background noise that had drained my energy was completely gone. The frantic mental space I used to spend managing my mother's artificial emotional crises and deciphering Chase's subtle financial manipulations was suddenly entirely mine again. The silence in my new penthouse overlooking the San Francisco Bay wasn't lonely. It was profoundly empowering. I woke up every morning at 5, made a cup of black coffee, and looked at the city skyline with absolute clarity. Eliminating the two largest parasites in my life didn't deplete me. It unlocked a level of productivity I hadn't realized I possessed. My mind was sharp, my focus undivided, and my financial health was entirely under my own control, free from the threat of exploitation. Arthur Vance called me last Tuesday afternoon during a routine financial review. "The corporate audit is officially finalized, Harper," he stated over the speakerphone, while I reviewed the steel procurement schedules for the Silicon Valley project. "Your liquid assets have doubled. Firm revenue is up 45% from last quarter, and your personal portfolio is completely insulated from any external liabilities. The dead weight has been entirely removed from the ledger." I leaned back in my executive chair, looking out at the Golden Gate Bridge. "Thank you, Arthur," I said, my tone level and satisfied. It turns out that when you stop carrying people who are actively trying to undermine your foundation, you build much higher, and you move much faster. I hung up the phone and focused back on my blueprints. I was no longer maintaining a compromised structure. I was designing an empire, and for the first time in my life, the blueprint was entirely mine.
Arthur Vance sent the final legal disposition report to my office 2 months later. In the United States legal system, financial fraud combined with solid digital evidence moves rapidly towards a predictable conclusion. Chase couldn't afford a high-profile defense attorney after his assets were frozen, so his public defender advised him to take a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to grand larceny and corporate embezzlement. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in a federal correctional facility in California, coupled with a mandatory restitution order that will garnish any income he makes for the rest of his natural life. A friend recently spotted him during his pre-trial transfer, looking hollow, stripped of the designer suits and the unearned confidence he used to prey on independent women. He is now broke, criminally exposed, and thoroughly ruined. He chose a high-stakes gamble, and he lost everything.
Victoria's descent was equally absolute, though her prison is a social one. After the 48-hour eviction notice expired, she was forced to move her remaining personal belongings into a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a cheap suburban neighborhood miles away from the city center. The high society circles she'd spent decades cultivating closed their doors permanently. She is completely isolated, surviving solely on a meager Social Security check, unable to maintain the luxury lifestyle that defined her identity. Last week, an envelope arrived at my corporate headquarters. The return address was written in her familiar, elegant handwriting. I opened it to find a 3-page letter filled with desperate apologies and requests for a meeting. "Harper, I am your mother," she wrote, her ink smudged by what appeared to be tears. "We all make mistakes, but blood is thicker than water. I am living in poverty, and I need my daughter." I read the words without a single flicker of anger or regret. In the past, those emotional appeals would have triggered a sense of obligation. Now they just looked like a poorly drafted contractor from a bankrupt contractor. I didn't write back, I didn't call. I simply placed the letter into the office shredder and watched the machine reduce her manipulation to thin strips of waste paper. I called my administrative assistant into the office immediately. "If Victoria Miller calls or attempts to enter the building," I told her, my tone direct and clear, "inform security to treat her as a trespasser. We have zero business with her." My assistant nodded efficiently. "Understood, Miss Harper. Consider it handled." People often ask if the price of cutting off your own family is too high. In American culture, we are trained to value reconciliation, but we often forget to value self-preservation. Chase and Victoria didn't suffer because I was cruel. They suffered because the legal and social consequences of their own actions finally caught up to them. I merely refused to be the cushion that softened their fall. I refused to let my hard work fund their deceit. Tonight, I am sitting in the boardroom of my firm, looking out at the city lights. The expansion plans for our new Chicago office are spread out before me, a testament to what happens when you protect your own equity. The architectural foundation of my life is finally secure because I personally removed the rot before it could spread. Looking back at the entire trajectory of this journey, the lesson is clear. Never let your loyalty become slavery. Self-worth is non-negotiable. If you don't value your own structure, no one else will. I picked up my pen, turned my attention back to the blueprints, and continued building my empire.